This DVD is to be about the shops in Lossie which are still in existence as shops, and it's to be covering Branderborough, which is the area that was developed by the Branders, funnily enough, when they started to build the harbour, the present day harbour, to replace the river harbour, which had not been terribly successful. And I thought I would start with the shop that I regarded as basically the biggest shop in the world when I was little, because it was a real shop. It's now the Chinese restaurant, and in my day it was Carey's. Carey was an Elgin firm that bought this site and developed it. They also had shops in Elgin. I was astonished to discover the shops in Elgin. I didn't know anything about the fact that Carey's had anything else. Apparently had Bucky and Keith as well. But this was what Carey's looked like when I was just starting the school. And you can see on the right hand side the teas and the sugar and flour, all the dry goods were across there. The glass case held the chocolates, if I remember right. I love to hear in the extreme right there, this shining golden till cash register, which had a handle on the right hand side there, so that they would punch in the amount, caw the handle, and it would record that on a roll of paper. I don't think I knew what they did with the paper. The left hand side of the shop in this photo, that was the bacon, obviously bacon slicer there. And they also did the cheese and the butter. Butter came in great big dollops, and they took it off and patted it with wooden things, and then eventually wrapped it in greaseproof paper and handed it over. In the middle, just the back of the door, was something very, very important. That was the biscuit display. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 different lots of biscuits, one of which would be the broken biscuits. I went into one of the other shops, Hayes, down at the harbour, and asked for a pennyworth of broken biscuits, and when I was told there weren't any, I said, "Could you not break some?" and was chased for my cheek. I hadn't meant to be cheeky, I didn't know I was being cheeky. 1937, March 1937, there was this great fire which burned out the Careys and Beatrice's next door. You can see that they had balustrades across the top there and fancy Grecian bottles. Next door had thistles, still there. So this went on fire, and that meant, of course, that business stopped for, I think, a year before it was rebuilt. I watched it at the age of 5½, just started the school, and I would have been standing roughly where the photographer was for this, and the real worry amongst the grown-ups was that the fire might reach the back of the shop, because in the back of the shop they had the paraffin tank. All the grocers sold paraffin round the back. You would go out the front door, round the back, and get a lemonade bottle filled with paraffin, which you took up and put into your paraffin heater. Paraffin heaters were everywhere. It's hard to look back and see some of the changes that you've not ever thought about. Of course, I was a little boy. I was amongst the small fraction of the onlookers who were kind of hoping that the fire would reach the paraffin tank and give us a rather more spectacular tank. The shop at that time had as its junior a boy called Lachlan McIntosh, who went on eventually to be the manager, and then when Carey sold out, he bought the shop. The boy on the bicycle could well have been Sandy Simpson. Sandy was a message boy and was cycling up to the shop the following morning to start his work, when somebody says, "You needna bother, my loon, the shop burned down last night." It was rebuilt, of course, was very fancy front, the very popular polished granite at the front. This is how it looked before Carrie's went on fire, and you see next door was Beatrice's, and after that there's still a house with a small shop built into it. That house was knocked about to produce another couple of shops, which we come to now. Oh, that's Beatrice's. Beatrice's rebuilt. Went through a number of changes, and the last couple included a bridal shop. Beatrice was Beatrice Innes, married a man, Mr. Rawlings, and lived at the foot of the school brae, and she had a boy, Rawlings, so I can see his face, can't remember his name. What it'll be like when I'm old. Next door was a separate building, which ironically had gone on fire in my mother's young days, so just round about the beginning of First World War. So that was why that had probably been rebuilt then. The butchers now, McLennan. Before that, the butchers was Macbeth. Jimmy Macbeth being the man who won fame by winning at cards the house of Charlie Neaves. The house is something lodge, Linwood Lodge. Looks into the putting green, or the putting green as was. Next door, this had gone through a whole host of different ownerships. I remember it lying empty for a while, and then it was a tea rooms, and then it was a watchmakers, and then one of the sort of longer lasting businesses was Johnson's of Inverness, who sent through a young man to manage it, a man by the name of Sandy Mackenzie, who married in the town and is still living up the town in Lossie. Next along was Jolly Macintoshes. This eventually became the Lossie Printers. Raymond Wood and Binky MacDonald ran it as Lossie Printers and built out the back and ran it very successfully for several decades. They retired and sold it on, and the next management moved down to behind Arthur Duthie's and sadly has gone out of business. Joan McIntosh, who ran it, Jolly McIntosh, I made the mistake once of asking why they called her Jolly when she wasn't. Unfortunately, some of her relatives were present, and I was no doubt given a clap in the lug for being cheeky again. And there was always misunderstandings. I wasn't really being cheeky. Across the road, that was Annie Ethert's. I was never in it because it was all... There seemed to be a lot of shops that supplied ladies with cardigans and coats and stockings and so on. I always liked the gutter up above, cast iron with wee fleuries cast in, still there. This was for a long time Jimmy Ross's. Jimmy had mixed goods catering for the tourists that Lossie got during the summer then, selling them junk, I suppose, but also very importantly selling the newspapers, but he sold particularly the Sunday papers. So Sunday we'd go to kirk, 11 o'clock, 11 to 12, 12 till half past I was in Sunday school, and then I'd tear down there to get the Sunday Post so that we could read about Oor Willie and the Bruins, and also eventually about the football with Jack Harkness reporting on the football. This was a chemist for a long time. In fact, I think that bit was built up by Johnny Murray, who was the qualified pharmacist. His brother Pete Moe did the deliveries and eventually had a van that he went up country supplying groceries to the farmers. And when I was a grouse beater in 1951, I think it was, up at Advie, I bought my first unrationed sweets from him, Cadbury's Flake, which had been off the market for the entire war. Johnny Moe was a chemist who made things, as chemists did in those days. He made stuff called Alertogen, which was supposed to revive your nerves and things like that. I had no idea what was in it, and I didn't have any problem with my nerves at the time, so I never found out. Across the road from Johnny's was the modern bakery. Bell Cole ran this and sold it eventually to Alexander's, and it was run by Isabella Imlach all the time that I ever used it. And I used to go down there on a Saturday morning with half a crown, 12.5 new pence, to buy as many different fancy cakes as I could manage. Biscuits we called them then. Next door to that was the Cowsey Dairy. Alistair Adam, the farmer across in Cowsey, had turned this into a dairy, and through the back was the milk storage, solid concrete floor, and this shop had a solid concrete floor which was very cold to the feet, as I discovered when we used it as a charity shop for a while. Along the street, I used to be sent down here when I was little to go to Rachel's. I could never understand why Rachel's shop had Harlan's written on it, until eventually I discovered that she was married to a Fred Harland, an Englishman who had come up during the First War, I think, and married Rachel. Unfortunately, he ran off before the Second World War with somebody else's wife, and this stayed as Rachel's until she retired and sold it to Robertson, Grace Robertson's father. Ran it for a long time, and now it's a sandwich bar run by young Kelly. Butchers. This was again a place I was sent to, Panamance, half a Panamance I suppose, and during the war you had to queue up there for quite some time to get your ration. It was run by Bob Anderson. I didn't know he was called Anderson. I just knew him as Bob the Butcher. You know, you speak about Bob the Builder. So here was Bob Anderson. He had pictures of cows inside with slices out of them, and pictures of black and white Frisians, I remember. His father had been a butcher down in Pitcaveney Street, and then eventually in 1 Queen Street in the very corner, where you can still see the scalloped corner for the shop. This is now a Thai restaurant. It had been the electrical shop for quite a number of years. Bill Martin. Bill came with the Air Force and was, as we used to say, up our stair. He was a lodger. He and his wife were lodgers during the war for some time. Stayed on in Lossie when he was demobbed and ran this business. Before that, it had been a shoe shop run by the brother of our skipper, Joseph MacLeod, Dovey. And here's Dovey's shop with a few men hanging about there on the coronation day for George VI. We had been very upset when Edward abdicated, his brother, and the reason we were very upset was not so much about royalty, but the fact that we knew that if it was a coronation we would get chocolate. So this was us marching round to the square to get our chocolate, led by the provost of the day, that was Peter Smith, Peter Bow, and we formed up there in serried ranks. But here's Peter, because on the right hand side of that picture is Maisie Forsyth, my first ever teacher. Marvellous teacher, marvellous person, and I suspect that it's partly because of the start I got with her that I stayed in education, basically still in it today, I suppose. Alongside her, the tall lady, I suppose, must be Miss MacLeod, but I don't remember Miss MacLeod being pretty. So could be wrong. She stayed on for a long time in the school and eventually married Bob Brown, the science teacher. Served her right. These are the dear sweet children marching along to the square. So somebody should be able to recognise themselves, because they're all 80 years old this year. That was our class. Quines were at the front and the loons were at the back, pulling the Quines' hair. They were marching just at that point, just past this building, which was the fish shop. I was always kind of puzzled by the fish shop in Lossie. I mean, if we wanted fish, we didn't go and buy it. We went down to the market and said, "Geese a fry," and a man gave you a fry and you went home, and that was that. When it came to the Elgin holidays, folk would come down from Elgin and they'd say "geese a fry," and then they'd get a fry as well. Fishermen were very generous or prodigal or something. It was a fish shop run by Willie Campbell for a long time, then eventually taken over by the Cow family, Joe Cow, and eventually his son, I think, John Cow. And during the time that they had it, I think this frieze was painted of representing fishing in Lossie. The next owner painted it over. This you know, active vandalism, basically. Next door, the chip shop and what was next door was the cafe, Peter's Cafe. Peter Seviera in Elgin had the wisdom to see that if we were building an aerodrome in 1938, it would be a good thing if we had provisions for the people who were going to be in the aerodrome. So it's 1938, 1939 this was built. The chip shop, for a long time I used to get fish and a penny's worth for 4p, fish was 3p, chips a penny, so that was old pennies. And a few years ago I bought a fish supper, fish and chips, for £4, so a change of 240 times over the years. Next door was a cafe, very popular cafe for a long time, and you went in there for a drink of orange juice. It's only in the last 20 or 30 years that we've become gulled into believing that you've got to drink wine to be sophisticated. We knew that we were sophisticated when we were buying the orange drink. Above that was the billiard salon. Billiards was supposed to be a sign of a misspent youth, and I misspent some of my youth there, playing with quite a few people, including Bill Flood. Bill Flood was a character and was quite frequently somewhat inebriated, but was still very good at snooker and billiards, and loved to play skittles, where you had a black in the centre spot and 4 pins round it, and you had to kind of knock them down in rotation. This shop was one that was an ironmonger, I think, at one stage, and then it was, after the war, it was bought by a young man who stayed on because he'd married a Lossie girl after the war, a Cornishman by the name of Dickie Freeman. Dickie was there for several years before he went down to the shop down by the harbour that he stayed in. By then a lot of his trade was with the boats, and you can see that he had all popular makes and stock of prices ranging from 5 guineas. The guinea was £1 and 1 shilling, £1 and 5p. And it was rather posh to put things in guineas. When the war was imminent, there were people in Inverness, Caledonian Associated Cinemas, who saw that if we were going to have an aerodrome, we would have several thousand men there and they would need to be entertained. So they built this cinema, which opened in, I think, 1939, built as soon as the drome was started, 1938. They built this. and opened it with Dawn Patrol with Errol Flynn as the hero dying bravely in the last scene to protect his best friend who went on to marry the girl. During the war, this had 3 changes a week of films. Monday night, Wednesday night, Friday night, a new film, and Saturday there would be a huge queue to get in, right the way down the side of the building there, and we just loved, that was our entertainment, Saturday night. Now you've got television spoiled all these things, they've got changed all these things, improved them maybe, who knows. The front of the cinema had a kind of veranda thing which carried news of the next picture to come. In this particular case, because it was a march for the current Queen's coronation, Queen Elizabeth's coronation, they had Long Live the Queen or whatever there. And these are the guides marching along. Blew that up a bit. That looks very like Lottie Pole in the centre of the front row there. She and her sister Karen ran this for quite some time. Could be Karen Pole. There was the doorman. We had a very swanky doorman there, always had gloves on his shoulder there. I don't know whether he ever wore them. I've forgotten his name, can't tell you. Somebody will tell you. The chemist, Tommy Manson, ran this for a long time under the name of Gare and Manson. Gare died, I think, quite soon after they took over the shop, which had been owned by Sissy Oliphant's parents and run as a boot shop before that. The shop had undergone quite a few changes, and you see the bit up above that was built on to this kind of squared off corner, and you can probably see, which I had never noticed in my entire life until I took this photograph, that there had once been a door or a window. In fact, it was a window that was closed off there, but that might even have been the door. If we look now, we can see, in fact, that was the door, and this window was incorporated, and another door must have been knocked through for the Edwards family to get upstairs. This was Alky Jim the Butcher's to me. It's again undergone quite a few changes of ownership since then, and it's now it's been a vegetable shop for quite some time and now owned by Swanson's. Next door was run as a cafe by the Rizzas for a short time, few years. Clemente Rizza, Louis Rizza's father. Alky Jim Souter, AJ Souter, butcher, standing there before the shop was rebuilt. You can see that at that time it was a single story building, and it was castellated as had been the fish shop further along the road. Alexander J. Souter, orders called for and delivered daily. That again was very much the pattern of life, that you had loonies on bikes who would deliver these things wrapped up in paper and then wrapped round with newspaper to keep them clean. So here's Alky Jim once the shop had been rebuilt. The black was black polished granite, which was all the rage at that time. Polished granite was the last thing in shops. And here's the stock for Christmas after the war, and you can see that there's plenty on display. During the war, of course, there was nothing whatever to be seen. It was all snapped up as soon as it came in. Down Queen Street, down at the foot of Queen Street, there's this Chinese restaurant. I remember Jim Flett building a little shed in there to run his plumber's business from. It never seemed to be terribly busy, terribly successful. I've never been in the Chinese are there. Across the road, Buckley's, the paper shop for a long time. Before that, Mitchell's, and before that, Heaton's. So we come back to that if I remember rightly. And on the side of the building there, a 3-storey building, most unusual in Lossie, a 3-storey building. Advert for the Steamboat Hotel. Used to be the Railway and Steamboat Hotel at one time. A diversion up into the square. This is in King Street, at the pet fish shop now, and before the war I remember it as Murison's. Murison's, I think, were Elgin people who ran the shop, and the thing I remember about it was that if you shopped there you got brown stamps. After the war we got Green Shield stamps, and there was another one whose name I've forgotten. Green Shield stamps were all the rage for years. And then they went belly up, and nowadays we've got what's their names, Tesco, with your card and you get points. It's all the same thing. It's a device to try and get you to keep on coming back. The ownership changed. Allen's, Smith's, and I see that this is actually a VG store, which I didn't know because I wasn't there at the time, and see somebody's moped there, a motorbike with pedals. Up at the top of the square was Leask's, and again that was very important to me because every year I'd be taken to Leask's and I would get yet another Air Force Blue Braemar jumper in lamb's wool. And I usually had V-necks, but occasionally I'd get a crew neck, and the jumper would last me a year before it became the second jumper. It was a Sunday jumper for a year, and then it became a school jumper. Leask was followed by his son Bertie Leask, but Jimmy Leask was an important member of the kirk next door, St James's, and he used to come along every Sunday morning immaculately dressed as befits a clothier, and he wore spats. He's the only man I've ever known who wore spats on a Sunday. I don't know if he wore, no I don't think he wore on the rest of the week. At the other corner of that block was this shop which lay empty I think for some time, and it was owned, or it was run for a while, by George Smith. I think George's son Hugh ran it for a while as a paper shop and book shop. Bookshops have never been very successful in Lossie. But it's interesting that you see this scalloped corner, which is indicative of the fact that it was built as a shop, whereas many of the other shops were actually houses turned into shops. And this one has the date when it was built, 1864. I don't know what the badge is. It was run, of course, by the Hydro for a long time as their office for taking in the money. Back to Queen Street. This was Souttar's Polytechnic, and as with Tommy Manson's, they had done something clever up above the entrance to make a bonny window. There must be a name for it, I don't know what it is. Souttar's Polytechnic was clothing of all sorts, blazers, socks. I think they had shoes as well, so there were other shoe shops round the town. And it was a very busy place, and Mr. Souttar used to stand at the door wringing his hands in the well-known shopkeeper style, and was followed, if I remember rightly, by Mr. Brown, who did much the same kind of thing. But it was a very successful shop for a long time. It eventually became a do-it-yourself store, and one or two people had an attempt to run it as cafe, which never quite caught on, and now it's a Turkish kebab shop. Just along from the Turkish shop there is a tandoori, which used to be Jimmy Wilson's. Wilson was a wee stout manny with a fat red face, and if I sound as though I don't like him, it's because I didn't like him. We used to play football behind his house. We played in the ground of the Catholic Kirk, and if the ball went into Jimmy Wilson's, you didn't get it back that day. You had to wait till the next day before you got it back. So that's why he was a wee fat manny with a fat face, and it was red face. The Guthrie and his daughter ran this as ironmongers for a long time, both very tall, thin people. Guthrie owned the entire block, which was 2 houses upstairs and a double fronted shop which you went through underneath the stairs. This was the Clydesdale Bank. It was originally, well, it was the Northern Bank, where I opened my first bank account under Patty Lynch, and that was when I was going off to be a student in Aberdeen. Grace Robertson was his sidekick for years, and the Clydesdale Bank took over the Northern Bank, and it stayed as a Clydesdale Bank until a decade or so ago, when Clydesdale decided there wasn't enough business and left Lossie. So I left the Clydesdale and went down to the Royal, down the road. The bank had taken over from Roe Minnis, the chemist, who had been the man who remodelled the shop, the corner round about the First World War. He was a very prosperous chemist, but died young, I think. Don't know anything about the shop, was never in it, and it wasn't a shop in my day, it was somebody who lived there. Only important because upstairs was Sonny Wokie, who was the berth master at the harbour, told the boats where to tie up, and chased me when I was in the process of carving out my name on newly laid concrete at the side of the Brander Arms, which is why it only shows DSTEW, and I was never arty after that. The bank was built when they demolished Cowie's buildings. Cowie's buildings was a kind of warren of buildings on both streets there, High Street and Queen Street, and on the corner was a coal office, which was originally Cowie's. The Cowies were known as Billons. One of the reasons is said to be because their original family came from Boulogne and they became Billons. And the brae there was always referred to in my day by the old men as Billons Brae. Important now family because my grandfather and grandmother, Peter Stewart and Helen Corner, started off their married life in there, and that's what Cowie's Buildings was all about, young couples getting a start. Just like today, it was difficult for young couples to afford houses, so they started in rented accommodation. They left there when Peter had made enough money at the fishing to have a house built up on Union Street, and they moved up to number 10 Union Street, where I was born. Now the Bank of Scotland, of course. Back down the road, we kind of looked at this before, and now you can see it's a 3-storey building, and the top half of it was the Caledonian Bank. One of the boats, one of the steam drifters was the Caledonian, because the Caledonian had put up a quarter of the money for it. It became a hairdresser's a long time ago. Jane Sloan ran it as a hairdresser's. Miss Mackenzie, who ran the steamboat during the war, she ran that as a hairdressing salon, and it's been that, I think, ever since. And on the side of that, in the Baker Lane, you can see yet another advert for the Steamboat Hotel. That used to be a very popular kind of advertising, hoarding. You can see some of them in Elgin and in Moss Street still. The paper shop, Buckley's, Mitchell's before that, had been Yeadon's before that. And Yeadon's was an Elgin company which had seen an opportunity in Lossie and started this supply. This advert's on really because you can see Lossiemouth telephone number 1. You just ask the operator to be put through, as you see in American films quite often still. Was taken over by Mitchell's, and I was away from Lossie by the time they owned it. But their telephone number had gone up to 2069, so that's progress for you. Down round the corner, the Royal Bank of Scotland. That had been the National Commercial Bank of Scotland for many a year. And the National Commercial, it was swallowed up as the Northern had been and the Clydesdale eventually was. These were all swallowed up in the name of progress, and the progress was supposed to guarantee us stability. You can jump to your own conclusions. Just at the edge of the picture in the dike, you can probably make out a lintel. There was actually a doorway there because when before the bank, it had been a ship's chandler's, and if you bought a coil of rope, they dropped it down a hole at the back, and a small boy pushed it through, maybe got a penny for pushing it through, and emerged on the quayside with the coil of rope. So there's when it was the ship's chandler's, and next door was Jamesy Peterkin the chemist. He eventually moved down to the building at the foot of Hill Street, and before that, that building had been Sim, the baker. You can see just at the foot of Queen Street there, the cutaway door, that was Anderson the butcher's, eventually moved up Queen Street. Anderson was the provost. So here's a view of that, and towards the right you can see the building that burned down, Georgie Galt's, and you can also see the ship's chandler's there with the peak on it, and if you look carefully you can see the little black dot, and that was the doorway, still visible as a lintel. In the corner of the earlier one you can just see the word custom. There was a customs officer in Lossie for years and years until we started having problems with drugs when we got rid of the customs officers. I'm not quite sure of the logic of that, but there you are. The customs office was incorporated in the DIY, which is there now. Ian Peary ran it, and is now run by Mrs. Peary. Before that, the boy Stewart had it. But before that, it was the Dundee Equitable, and the Dundee Equitable was surprisingly enough a Dundee company owned by people called Smith, who had branches all over Scotland selling mass-produced shoes, cheaper shoes. If you went there for your shoes, you didn't kind of think they were the top class of shoe. In this photo you can see next door was the Scots Coupe. I don't think I ever knew how they wanted it pronounced. Nowadays it's still the bookies. I've never been in it. I bet on a horse once and it didn't win, so I never bothered again. Above these, of course, these were dwellings. Dougie Gray used to live there. He was a footballer in my day. Next door was Eddie Gordon's pub. I was never in it, and it looks as though I'm never going to be in it. The dike there used to have an upright iron pole which we used to swing on Fancy remembering that. Round the corner to Campbell and McConaughey, John Campbell moved his insurance company down here and spruced up the entire building, which we had always known as Arthur Duthie's. Before that it had been a fish processing building. But Arthur Duthie came through to Lossie from, I think, Peterhead, and he came through with a crippled leg following a motorcycle accident. So he was unfit to go to sea, and he set up as a fish salesman and eventually became a boat owner and was very influential in the development of the CNET fishing boat fleet. Arthur was a man who had vision, and thanks to him Lossie made a lot of progress in the 30s and 40s. Which was recovering from the disaster of the vanishing herring. Before the motorboats, Arthur Duthie took over from the steam drifters and was very influential in creating the modern motorboat fleet of the 30s, 40s and 50s. It was a very, very influential company, having the bulk of the Lossie boats, I think, as their clients. Back down at Pitgaveney Street, I'd forgotten to put in this shop here, which was originally owned by Jimmy Ross, who had the one up in Queen Street. The Ross store, souvenirs. We had a lot of tourists at that time, and tourists bought things to take home or to give away, and it was eventually taken over by Jimmy's assistant, Sophie Wilson, and became known as Sophie's. This one. This was probably the first shop I went into of my own free will. Jane Sloan, who had the steamboat, built this just before I started the school. There was quite a lot of building up at the head of the hill. Coolard Hill Terrace and School Hill Terrace were built. School Hill Terrace was built as I started to go up to school, and this was built presumably to see the people provisioned. And Jane ran this shop. She was I think a feisty character, you would say nowadays. But the reason I put it in, although it's not a shop now, it's still a business that I will eventually give some business to. But the school had gained a huge fence all the way around, an 8-foot fence all the way around the school property. And Dr. Jessup, the headmaster, never seemed to be that interested in education, but he was very interested in this fence, and if you were caught doing anything to the fence, you were up for the belt. Round about where that blue car is, there was a hole underneath the fence, and I can picture myself crawling under the hole there, which was kept very small so that Dr. Jessup wouldn't notice it, to go into Jane Sloan's to buy a pennyworth of scarmed caramels. Jane had had a fire, and not everything was thrown away. I don't know whether she'd been insured and whether the insurance company was being perhaps assisted in recycling. But scarmed caramels, and we thought that was mad. Of course, nowadays you do it on top of creme brulee with a blowtorch. But Jane, no, she set the house on fire. So that was the shop that I went into of my own free will, and remember it to this